we have Tyson Yunkaporta, an incredible thinker, culture worker. Very much words are failing me to be able to accurately express my gratitude for Tyson joining us here today. Uh, Guy, would you like to introduce Tyson?
Sure. Is Tyson here? We've got
Yes, just promoting imbalance.
um, where do we start? So grateful for Tyson's influence on us here at PermaQueer. Tyson responded to our first contact when we said we were doing a TEDx series on are you um, queers doing permaculture or are you queering permaculture, which set us on a very wonderful rabbit hole to really interrogate how this movement exists. So super happy for you to be here, Tyson. Super grateful to connect again. And I won't do any more introductions.
Oh,
I'll just pass
yeah,
it
but first, straight up, I can't claim, you know, credit for that idea because, like, I think it was, I mean, it was certainly already there because your response was just, yes, yes. That's, yes, someone said it. Thank you. And yeah, uh, well, yeah, it's always good to connect with you fellas. You fla, as we say, plural you here. uh, well, yeah, lots to talk about. Lots to talk about. Have been, yeah, researching border work here on Bunurong country and going out all around the world, actually, to lots of different Indigenous peoples. Um, yeah, and and I guess I want to bring that sort of border work theory to a sort of question that's always sort of in when you're doing permaculture. When I used to do it, was this kind of struggle with, what's native and what's non-native, and how you work with that binary, like what should be here, and like, should I be putting these foreign, like, uh, invasive things here that they're going to be feral, and how can I bring them in the right way so that they're in balance with everything around, and just that constant struggle with those binaries, which, as we know, it's a very different thing. So I've been doing a lot of work with trans researchers as well. um, yeah, and a lot of queer theory sort of marrying up and having really beautiful sort of theoretical and cultural embassy with the indigenous methodologies and indigenous knowledge and standpoint. It's been a pretty damn exciting year actually for that. We've been doing a lot of work over the last couple of years towards that. So I wouldn't mind jumping into that. Um, think about how we do that, mindfully and with cultural responsibility, all of us, for the non-human entities that we're interacting with all the time, and and having a mindfulness about the kind of sacred and sentient nature of these things. Um, that isn't just kind of a woo-woo, or like I feel spiritual and I'm meditating with this tree, but like like a real kin. How do we as kin with understandings of all these non-human things as kin. So that's included doing like a cane toad embassy with Ecuador. To and so and singing those songs together, um and singing our songs from Aboriginal Australia, um about the cane toads, because we've had those for nearly a century. Because initially when they came in, we were looking for how we could, bring that into the totemic system. And so there were song cycles and, people who had totemic responsibility for the cane toads and managing them, etc., until that was disrupted. But we still have the ceremony for that. And it's good to exchange that with the Ecuadorian indigenous peoples, of the Amazon Andes. And down through the jungle there. Oh, just yeah, and also being in embassy with them for the eucalypts, because that's regarded as a feral invasive pest in South America and in most of the countries where it is. These bloody gum trees everywhere. but you find with indigenous cultures there that they've actually, made relationships with them, and they have ceremony and story for these, and they care for them, and because they're caring for them and bringing them into relation with the ecosystem, not just with these simplistic ideas of symbiosis, but as kin and these big kind of queer assemblages of cooperation and movement and color and signaling systems. It's just yeah, it's very vibrant. So I guess it's like the question would be, how do we do that? How do we take cultural responsibility, all of us, for our non-human kin? And of course, the answers to that question also then shed light on issues and how do settlers find a place here, as lawful human beings, on country. It's yeah. Anyway, I'm excited about that work, and I think yeah, I have a lot more to bring to the table than for use like than I did last time. I think yeah, because of this. So, working with Emily McCavan, who's like a trans Jewish scholar, yeah, we've done some exciting work around the rhetoric of pollution, toxicity, and contagion, in conservation and in agriculture, all these kind of things, and how that kind of it's just a projection, really. That's in a feedback loop going back and forth between the society and the conceptions of nature and what pollution is. What is toxic, what's abnormal. There's that, it's a very Abrahamic religious idea, grounded in that idea that, God put these animals here and these people here, and that's their region. You know what I mean? That's where they belong, and everywhere else they're an alien. They're a pollutant. They're a contagion. They are toxic for other environments. But that's not how we've done things throughout history, like as human beings. So I wanted to show you this, which is Woomera. Like a spear thrower, but note in there in the native beeswax, which is black. You'll see those red seeds, and you might recognize those ones as giddy beads, or you might call them jaquirity beads. There are thousands of words all around the equator and around the southern hemisphere for these same seeds. The Latin names are Abris precatoria, which means prayer bead. So these are regarded in every culture, even Roman, as sacred things. These little red beads with the black dot on them, and in my language we call them puku. And they go on sacred objects, often stuff that's about gendered business and gender relations. Like across, and there is so much ritualized transness in the ceremonial and sacred aspects of these things, because they have many medicinal uses, including in places all around the world, like Sri Lanka, America, bloody, I mean, you can think all around Africa. These are medicinal things, for like, they can be for rabies, animal bites, like all kinds of stuff. But their main thing and what makes them sacred is that they're a ancient contraceptive. So you've got to pick the right one, though. There's ways that you test to get the right one. Otherwise, it'll kill you. It's deadly poison. That's the main thing. You grind up one of these, slip it in a drink, and that fella's finished. And there's no cure. There's no antidote. There's no treatment. You're definitely dead, even today. Yeah, so it's a very interesting thing. But men and women can take that and sterilize themselves for up to a year. So it drastically reduces a man's sperm count to like, almost nothing for the best part of a year, and then it comes back. Comes back slightly smaller than before. I've seen in the studies of these things. Yeah, but it's a really amazing thing. So I've been working with this one, from all around the world, and yeah, it's in this Woomera, and the Woomera, for me, um, in our ways, and I can't tell you too much about it, but I can tell you, why it's sacred for a man. We carry these around even when we don't have spears, because it's a spear thrower. We carry it around because it manages our nganwi, our big spirit, in our belly, and that's also the name for the rainbow serpent. This one here, that rainbow snake, taipan, which is where we get the word taipan. Yeah, and that unseen spirit that goes, through in my clan, that goes, that's everywhere, but it's very powerful in a man's belly, and we use the Woomera to sort of manage and direct that so it doesn't harm people, because in certain seasons, the wonderful thing about the serpents is in every culture is that they kind of shapeshift in different times and places. So a serpent will be male in one season, but then in another seasons it'll have enormous milk-filled bosoms, to regenerate the land. And the taipan for us, it can take different forms like rainbow, and it's serpent form. But then that serpent form changes shape, and it's also a headless man, um, a headless man who menstruates. So there's we have a lot of ceremonies for that. I can't go into, particularly with male initiation, which is, there's a lot of gender fluidity around that, particularly for men, because that taipan confers like a spirit womb, for us, and we have spirit children, and these are the things we manage with that Woomera. But yeah, that giddy bead, it's very sacred, and it's in a lot of different objects that regulate the interactions between men's business and women's business, in that kind of space in between. So that's very cool. And if you think about it like that, we have this concept of ngech, which is like taboo, forbidden. And in different times and places, around death and things like that, there is this idea that some actions, places, people are forbidden for a time. But there is no notion of impurity, So in Judaism, Islam, Christianity, there's this idea of impure substances, impure states, impure people, and the contact with them will make you impure. You see this in a lot of sort of Hinduism, Buddhism as well, with the idea that women can make a sacred object impure and strip its power away, or take a man's power away just by contact or proximity. It's all through a lot of these, massive religions. You'll find this concept of impurity, but we don't have it, and there's this idea of journeying. We have a really big oral tradition around like actually going to other countries, sea voyages. We have a historic and proven connection with the Silk Road. We've for like many centuries. We've been trading up, through the Gulf, through all around Darwin and Arnhem Land, and then up on the Western Cape, trading up through New Guinea, through Indonesia, and connecting with that trade going up into the Silk Road, up into Asia. Lots of journeyers and travelers, for many millennia coming through, and even up to 10,000 years ago with the dingo being the only placental native mammal in Australia. Up until a certain point, that certainly came in trade through Asia. Yeah, so, there's this idea of a cultural embassy. And there's an idea of an Indigenous border work, where borders are not walls, and they're not barriers, but they're sites of increase, and they're sites of kin making. And, we stop at the borders and we meet, and these are sacred places for gatherings and ceremony and exchange. And we adopt each other's children and we marry across, and we go to their place and become that, and they come to our place and become us. Um, there's never this idea of like a foreigner who is impure, who is going to poison the blood of our nation. You might remember that from last century and recently from this century, these things being uttered. Yeah, and so also between the genders and the roles of different fluid ritual, enactments, but then fluid people taking on different roles to work in that space in between. That's always been a thing here. Yeah, so there's this idea of exchange, an idea of constant exchange, the idea of a local system that cannot be a closed system or it will just collapse. Most places that become obsessed with walls and keeping things out and bringing things in, in an uneasy relation and having things camped around the walls, you always know they're about to collapse. Those societies and communities, when they start strengthening the walls, making the walls, bigger. I know that the wall in the US is, they've started painting that black. Because Trump figures he found out that black surfaces absorb heat, and so he wants the wall really hot so that people will burn their hands if they try and climb it. So when people become irrationally obsessed with walls, that their culture is imploding, and it's imploding because they've erected barriers around it that do not facilitate flows of energy and matter and goods and variety and diversity from surrounding systems and from systems, far afield. When you block those flows, you create problems and you create an entropic system that simplifies and simplifies and falls apart. And I guess we all know that as gardeners and people who are trying to do, permaculture and find the ways. We know there's a difference between edge as a dynamic thing that increases the mana, as Guy would say. Yeah, and that edges are dynamic, and that's where you get your most growth. But we all know gardens where it's there are and people put the stones, to make sure nothing can get in, and they try and block flows of insects seasonally, and animals and wallabies that are going to eat the tops out of your saplings and all that kind of stuff. It's got a constant battle to try and stop those flows. But I guess the idea of permaculture is that we kind of jujitsu and sort of flow with those flows and try to place things in a way where those flows will stimulate more growth and abundance rather than knock it back. Yeah, and we know the monocultures don't work. You got to at least do the the cliched sisters thing, with your corns and bean and squash, as a minimum, but you need that exuberance. But then some things don't go together as companions. And so kinship is also about avoidance relations. These things are in relation, but it's indirect and they can't have direct contact. There's all these things. And our indigenous kinship systems work like that. We're related to people closely who we don't really interact with directly, and that can be niche taboo, like your in-laws, your in-laws, your mother-in-laws. These are people that you have an avoidance relationship with, which is really handy sometimes. Yeah, but you are still, you have indirect influence because they have a lot of power over you. As a man, they make sure they hold you in check and make sure you don't make a mess. And it's these kin and totemic entanglements that are sort of they're part of nature, and so they follow the same pattern. So there's those same entanglements and avoidance relations, but then also attraction, and all in this just amazing signaling system. But anyway, I guess if you think of nature in more simplistic terms, there is that idea of of pollution, you know, and toxicity. Um, and these happen, whenever borders, you know, um, enjoy some flow. You have this very, very Abrahamic, ideal of this impurity happening, this, someone becoming unclean, impure, you know, diseased, etc. Yeah, and I don't know, it always leads to eliminationism. So like, for example, our old people's response to the cane toads was not to try and exterminate them, because that is absolutely impossible anyway, but it was to try and bring them into some kind of relation with the ecosystem, and do ceremony for teaching the crows who pay attention to these things how to manage them, and flip them over and eat them out from the guts side, and make sure that they're on their backs so the poison can be taken down by the ants, and neutralized there, and keeping them out of the waterways, all these kind of things, and the cautionary stuff about how to handle the poison, and what that's useful for, as medicine, etc., etc. Yeah, so it's bringing things in, finding ways to make kin, finding ways to adjust your system to accommodate, these newcomers, and bring them into relation, and we have that with dogs. Dog is actually one of my totems, and they have their own sacred site streaming places story that's sort of woven into a kind of everywhen of, what people call dreaming, yeah. And I guess that's, yeah, that foundational law that we have, the law in the land, that, in the waterways, that the serpent governs. It's this thing that transforms, into human form, into crocodile form, eel, submerged log, like it takes, and then rainbow in the sky, rising groundwater. It takes all these different forms. It can be wind, storm, lightning, it takes many forms. It's a shapeshifter. And it sort of reminds us that, that's the law. We have to shift through different time places, because in our languages, time and place are the same word often, or the same suffix, yeah, so we think of it more in terms of time, place as being one thing, because a place is always moving, like seasonally, it's a different place, from one week to the next, the place changes. Everything is shape shifting all the time. So the idea of trying to hold these things stationary, these systems, to keep them pure and, genetically pure, and, what belongs and what doesn't belong. Like, yes, you have to have some, like you have to have, like quite a bit of managing things. You can't just let new things just bloody plop in and start wrecking the joint. You have to actually come into relation, and they have to come into relation with you. But yeah, if you go towards this eliminationism, that's where the pollution rhetoric takes you. That's where the native and non-native rhetoric binary takes you. That's where the gendered binaries take you. It always goes towards this eliminationism to get rid of the contagious, toxic other. And that eliminationism, that's why you find so many permaculture groups, especially, holy crap, over COVID. So many of them, that just, it became clear that it was always a kind of thinly veiled eco-fascism, and that there was a lot of soft eugenics in it. And that became hard eugenics as a quiet part, and then the quiet part was out loud, and then it's just normalized quite a bit now. And we've sort of found that with a lot of our permaculture communities. We've gone, oh my God, okay, and then they've become, nativists and RFK devotees, and yeah, and a lot of conversions too to evangelical Christianity, and yeah, a lot of people sort of came out as their true selves there. And I think a lot of it is around those logics when people are very passionate about nature and ecology and purity of nature and all these sorts of things. They turn towards that. But how do you deal with the ferals? So the human ferals, um, who are kind of new age permaculture kind of people who, you find them suddenly, they're like yoga mums sitting in a drum circle with bloody Nazis, um, and all that weirdness. So how do you deal with the ferals? How do you deal with the feral non-humans? How do you deal with the foxes? How do you deal with the radiata pines and things like this? How can we come into relation with these things that are so destructive that we just hate them? I still have like an instinctive, reflexive disgust, of a lot of these non-natives, and to retrain myself to think of them as, potential kin, and coming into relation with them, and then of course having to come into relation with occupying cultures and laws, through that, when these things are all trying to kill us, when they're exterminating us, these outsiders, these others. How do we come alongside each other as kin? Um, and I guess it is all about like recognizing the exuberance, of nature, and that these, and understanding time, place, not just as these sort of, you know, um, you know, the only sort of seasonality you find in a lot of ecology is just like, it's, well, August, that's the mating season for this animal. And, in this season, the bowerbird male, performs a mating dance and does a mating display and creates a bower. And, that's their mating display and that's their season. And the best one will get to penetrate a female and continue his genes. But not everything's like that. And even bowerbirds aren't really like that, and so many other things are like, anti-kindness, like little marsupial rodents, where like, everybody shags everybody for a couple of weeks. And, when babies are born, there's like, there's a litter with like 8 different fathers. And then the fathers do so much sex that they use up a whole lifetime of rapid heartbeats doing that, and then they drop it after, which is pretty cool. But they're not the only ones involved. And when the bowerbirds are mating, the mating display is not just his dance and the objects he places around his bower and his beautiful bower. That's not the extent of the display. It's not an individual. There are 1,000 other things displaying for them that are involved in this ongoing constant sexual flow, in nature. And if you understand it through sex, not as fetish, but as like an ever-present force, and mana flowing through everything. And even, mechanically, even to understand it as a system of signals, that one behavior signals and triggers another behavior in another species and another species and another species, and then their changes signal 1,000 other things. So there's a constant, set of like 1,000,000 signals going off at once, changing behaviors in a place to create that time place. It's just, it's amazing. So what do the bowerbirds do for the rest of the time outside of that little window for mating? Well, we're not interested in what they do, because, well, that's it. We'll see them again next year when they're doing the interesting thing. And it's like, well, no, that's just one. They have, enormous like sexual ceremonies in these queer assemblages with many other species in totemic relation, biological relation, that aren't recognized as symbioses. So weirdly, like, so when the eagles are mating and nesting, like the big birds like turkeys and lyrebirds, things like this, that's a cold time thing. That Western idea of these barriers around things, and well, this is this time the birds mate in spring. Springtime, the birds are mating and singing their songs and making their nests. It's like, nah. What about turkeys? What about eagles? Well, and does that mean that the bowerbirds aren't participating in that mating? Like, yes, they are. They are. That's when they're flocking, and they are just, and there's no reason for it because they're using up all that energy. And supposedly every behavior of a stupid animal is just to maximize the amount of energy they can get from food, which is assumed to be scarce. But no, all animals put so much energy into ceremony, and not just in their mating time, but other people's mating time. So those turkeys are doing that, when those are doing that, those bowerbirds are flocking and doing these amazing, really sexy murmurations. Like a dance. They're part of that ceremony, and that triggers so many different things, behaviors, and ant. So much is driven by ant scent. And that's the ants mating time. That's at another time when they get their wings and then they do their ceremony, which is incredible. And everything has to be just right. Yeah, yeah. It's like that. If you ever seen The Little Mermaid, that "Go on and kiss the girl," that song. Sha la 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 la, don't stop now, and all the little animals popping up. It's kind of like that all the time, you know. Yeah, just around that one human kiss, there's all this other stuff going on. And it's the same in nature all the time. It's always, everything is always on. Everything's always in heat, and they're for each other, because everybody knows the best part of sex and of romance is not, the point of ejaculation. That's the annoying part because it's finished then. No, it's everything else around it. There could be months, and it's yeah, it's all the things and relations you do, with everyone else all the time, is profoundly, sexual and gendered and fluid, because you might not be the main actor. Because then after that time with the bowerbirds and after those things have happened, and the quolls have done their thing as well, then those things start to signal in different ways, which signals ants, which signals scent, which gets the female echidnas doing their thing. And they start doing their wiggly dance. And then the males start to form a procession behind her. And you'll see them for weeks. They're walking along in a train like nose to butt. And they're in absolute ecstasy, but it's not how ecology, as a science, it's not how this discipline sees that. They see that as a competition, and that, the male who has the most strength and power will end up being the one at the front of the chain when she finally says, yeah, all right, do it now. Because she's got to think about that, because that's a grotesque deck on that echidna. It's like 4 heads, and she's got and she has 2 vaginas. So it's a tricky proposition. My poor little bub. Sorry, my little autistic fella here. He's wanting something. I think he might have bit his tongue. Anyway, yeah, I should start biting my tongue on all that. But anyway, but the echidna thing, it's amazing because they're having a great time. It's all sexual, those male echidnas going along, and they're just all brothers. And it's just this musical chairs, and it might be this fella this year that has that moment that's very brief and disappointing at the end, and it might be another one, but I mean, they don't really care because it's the ritual, and it's all of that sexual bliss and ecstasy that happens for 2 weeks just doing the train. of like mostly it's male echidnas with their nose in the butt of the next one. Yeah, I I've never seen this, but I wonder if they ever just like end up detaching from the female and then going in a circle. I hope not, because they probably all die. They wouldn't stop. Yeah. So I don't know. This is when you start to see nature in this way, and when you start to see everything in terms of time, place, and of systems of signals that are constantly flowing. But then that's not just in that bioregion; it's in others, and then there's flows coming across. Um, like you're only going to see the black cockatoos, coming through. They're not like just in one home place. My brolga, that's something that migrates massively. The whales go all around the world. The sandpipers here in Melbourne, they go all the way to Siberia and back. There is this constant exchange and voyaging, just like all our human ancestors who spread this one little species, and it went not in a natural pattern of like, oh, well, that was all on Gondwana land once, and then it broke up, because no, it goes further afield. This is trade. This is trade that's happened, and voyaging that's happened over deep time, where everybody has this same sacred medicine seed all around the world, and that becomes, this governing sort of fluid boundary work, border work, practice, everywhere. These ceremonies of gathering and exchange and intermarriage and adoption and trade and bringing new animals, bringing new seeds, and then gradually integrating those into the system. And this lawful voyaging has gone on forever. But what happens, from that immense disaster of the Age of Discovery, which, by the way, the Age of Discovery was driven by.
I need to tell you.
That was driven by this desire to discover an Aryan homeland, a place of origin. So they were looking for Atlantis and shit like this, because they wanted to find evidence of that. There was an ancient white civilization that kind of proves that they're the best. Yeah. So there's those supremacist things that come through there. And it's weird, because they never saw themselves as toxic or contagious in the places they came into and ruined. So they didn't do lawful voyaging, and Indigenous people would meet them and try to sit down with them and then get confused about, oh, what are they doing? They're just walking straight in. Oh, they're bringing these pigs. What? Hang on, give us a minute. Tell me the story for that pig. What's the law for that? I don't know. The three little pigs. Whatever, man, get out of my way. So there's no story. There's no law, capital L. And so, how can you reconcile people who have no law? And so in they come. And they lost the law and replaced with those fantasies of Atlantis and stuff. So in they come. And so you end up with non-human passengers with them that are not really passengers. They're more like sort of abducted slaves. And so they're brought in where they're not journeying, but they're being trafficked. So there are trafficked species here in Australia, and there's a lot of work to be done to help them come in. Yeah. So working with a lot of things. It's exciting to see what's happening with radiata pine. So for me, I have this revulsion of, what I've always called ferals, which is like alternative, new age, spiritual, Gaia, worshipping, Wiccan, all the stuff, some half-assed Celtic kind of mysticism. I've already see how I'm even describing it. It's just like, ridicule. Yeah. So I've always struggled. And I call them ferals, and then all these other plants and animals and cats and foxes, and they're ferals, and these bloody feral radiata pines coming off those big plantations that are poisoning the land, that are bringing pollution and toxicity to the soil, all these kinds of things. It'll take me a long time, but like as an Aboriginal person, you have to notice eventually that the migration routes of the black cockatoos have changed, to accommodate that season, that time place of radiata pines when they get their cones, because the black cockies love to eat them, so they come in and they do that. But there's passengers in the roots of the radiata pines, fungal passengers, that are brought fly agaric and psilocybin mushrooms, that grow around those trees, and even slippery jacks, as edible mushrooms as well. And these feral humans, they come and collect these things for the ceremony, for the ritual practice, They collect those mushrooms. They also collect the pine cones and the black cockatoo feathers to like decorate their altars and stuff while they're tripping bowls or doing their sacred ritual practice and things like this with the mushrooms. So you see this like little community starting to develop around that, and like this whole and all the exuberance around all the mating that's going on around there the whole time. And then that time place of the black cockatoos, they're coming and they're dropping other seeds from their migratory journeys, dropping other seeds around that radiata, and a lot of them don't take off because of the that piney sort of resinous sort of thing. You could say it's poisoning the ground, but it's also like it's starting to build other communities of things that actually like that and can grow in that or can mutate. And so there's other little plant communities growing up around them as well. Do we slash and burn and poison every radiata pine, which isn't actually possible? Once something starts spreading and it likes it and it's getting in on the reproduction, it's hard to stop. No, you don't. You have to look at the communities that are growing around that. We have to sit down with the people we call ferals and, find out their story and their lore. And then, we're doing the work of connecting those ones up with like actual like Scandinavian and Gaelic lore keepers who know the old lore and the old songs and the language, and making sure that they can come in and learn those things and then come alongside our old people and share that lore, and then work together to figure out how these trees can be cared for as kin and can find their place. White poplar is also the same. Oh, and of course, in that exchange, we figure out, from their knowledge of the tree, we've figured out how we can make our things out of that, because it's always been too rough for us to do our traditional carving with it. But we found, like, through our exchange with them culturally, these ferals and these Irish mystics, we found that you can scorch that wood and make it smooth. And so we've, developed an entire different carving sort of modality from our interaction with these others that we're coming, these non-human, tree folk that are, we're coming into relation with. Our black cockatoos did it, so we must as well, and we must move with those time places. So we do that. White poplar is the same. That's a huge problem, and a lot of many millions to spend each year trying to eradicate and clear these things. I did find one that was cut up into a series of stumps about yay. Someone had felled it and then just chopped it into all those manageable bits to take away on a truck later. So I took one of them and sat with it, and I observed where they were growing in the waterways, and the problems they were making for the waterways, with the substances that they had, and also the fact that they're attracted to the waterways because they're a very thirsty tree, which makes it a carving dream, for me in terms of making things like sculptures and shields, carved shields. Like I had one, yeah. Oh, there it is. Yeah, carved shields like this one. The wood dries really hard, incredibly hard and resilient, but it's like cutting pineapple when it's still fresh and wet, So yeah, I made this shield. That was one half of the stump. The other half of the stump I made into a bowl, because the more lore and story I heard for this white poplar tree from Spain and North Africa, which actually became what's called naturalized, problematic term, in the UK. It actually became part of the ecosystem about 500 years ago in the British Isles, and that's how it came to Australia then. So we know it's possible for these things to settle into an ecological niche and do less damage. So therefore, what do we need to do? Where are the places where there's salinity problems because the water table is high, where we can put these thirsty fellas? And they're also really fire resistant. That's why matches are made out of this wood, because the match will burn slow because they're very fire resistant. So can we imagine these places, where we can keep keep that underground water, down where it's supposed to be, working with these plant kin, as helpers growing in the right place. And also, them acting as fire breaks, because bushfire will just stop right up against them if they're thick, they won't come through. What other animals can we bring into relation with them? And just that bowl that I used, that I made out of the other half, amazing because of the fire-resistant property, a good fire bowl. You can put a lot of hot coals in that and it won't burn through it. Won't even scorch it very much. So you can do your smoking, ceremony stuff with that. And so the more you work with this in ritual, the more you sit down with, Basque peoples from Spain who have the story and have the law for that, then the more that law can come in alongside, our law and flow into these things. This is how we've always done it. Although you'll find in a lot of, especially since native title became a thing, there's a lot of kind of quarantine philosophies that have come into Aboriginal communities and elders groups and native title committees and boards and land management folks and Indigenous rangers, of this idea of quarantine, of stopping others from coming in, and even policing each other's identities all the time, and trying to eradicate, shoot all the pigs, get rid of all the water buffalo. And then we get into that impossible process of eliminationism, and that very much, dare I say, pollutes our culture and our law, and our relationships together with each other and with country. It's never a good thing. So it's important to revive and strengthen our traditional law, LAW, around border work and Indigenous embassy, and around voyaging and traveling for ceremony, which we've done forever. We travel right across the continent for ceremony. People came from as far away as, Western Australia and North Queensland to go to Southeast Queensland for the Bunyas every 3 years, the big Bunya festival there. And then the Bogong Moths ceremony in Alpine Victoria, down closer to here, where I'm on beautiful Bunurong country. So that's just around a couple of those things, the radiata and the poplar. We've also got a very exciting group we've been working for a few months, just around fox things, because that's a really tricky one, because the fox is a bit of a bastard. And, sitting down with all the Celtic law keepers and even the Scandinavian law keepers, and people from North Africa and people from South America, all have this fox story. These are always really tricky stories. And so we've sat in ceremony and heard all the songs and the language and the stories and the law around fox, and we're trying to unravel how we can get people in a position of cultural responsibility, for these non-human kin, how we can actually find them their place here, and how we can get them to come into relation with that place, so that there's balance with what they eat and how much of it they eat, and how they redirect the flows of the game trails, how that'll work to keep those flows going around them, how that works across lots of different seasons, etc., etc. It just, for me, it keeps coming back to, I keep getting pulled back to that idea of edge, and of edge being this dynamic space of in between, between changing conditions and times, and the way all these ecosystems move, and that constant exuberant force, of that love magic always running through everything. Yeah, and that law of the serpent in the ground flowing with all that. You can find out more about that with looking at our new book. Me and Megan, who just walked in the door, co-authored that new book, Snake Talk, that's just come out. And that's got a lot about border work and embassy and the law of the serpent and how it's on every continent, in every culture as a foundational story, a law that existed before the walls and the temples and all the rest, and that reconnecting with those, you find that they are shapeshifters and that they do travel and that they do talk to each other all around the world, and that there's a kind of common law, a common understanding of creation and destruction, and the times and places for these things that we all hold together and can give us actually a shared ontology. And I guess that's where all this research ended up, was with the concept of ontological recognition of people in exchange and embassy recognizing each other's ontologies, and that this is the vaccine against purity discourses and eliminationist rhetoric and all the stuff that becomes the quiet part out loud eco-fascism. So I guess there's like 8 minutes left if anyone wanted to jump in, comments and clarifications, etc.
Thank you. There's so much there and in so many different parts to it that I'm kind of letting that sink into me. But you came off mute as well, Guy, if you had something more.
Oh, ka rawe, ka mate pia diddly yarn. There's I just, endlessly grateful for your generosity and you know, sharing the living reciprocity of country and carrying us through that yarn of how how to sense make that relation, that reciprocity, that sexy, deeply embodied, life affirming narrative that is reality, that is what is all around us and has always been. And I'm really grateful for slipping out of that colonial box house, narrative of the malls and the Woolworths and into the reality of what murmurings are happening out there right now, and how are we are a part of that, but do we acknowledge and choose to be?
And the things that you're supposed to keep behind closed doors. I don't know what you do as long as you do it behind closed doors, and it's like, wow, no, that imprisons everything, everything that makes everything alive around us all the time. And our job is to be doing that. Like our species, we don't have a season just for that. We're supposed to be doing that all the time because we're the custodians of the love magic that keeps everything going. We've got to be out and proud doing that everywhere. And managing and helping the flows of everything else that's exuberantly joining in that dance too.
Golda. We've got a few questions from the crowd here. Well, a few affirmations actually. Can confirm Snake Talk is an amazing read. From Jacob, amazing. A comment from Manu here. Here at the mountains, Uncle sticks with privet and make essential oil out of lantana. So, beautiful resonance with that. How do we sense make relationship and ceremony in this context? We have a response here from Amy. This reminds me of binomial nomenclature, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong, which on one hand is a useful classification system, and on the other hand reflects the eliminationism, coloniality, and binaries. It misses other relationships and just has problematic names, like Indigenous genius named Joseph Banks. Wow.
Hey, I just wanted to sing out to that relation with privet. I found privet makes very good spears. I got a bunch of privet spears here. So thank you to that sibling calling out that privet.
I'd like...
and then you go to
I just wanted to throw something out in the pot as well about as someone who is a feral in many ways and has been very much the feral that you named as well. Someone whose name is Toad, not even in any subtlety introduced species. Um, I really love your framing around cultural responsibility. I find that people from the colonial background don't know how to do a relationship in a relationship that isn't just one way. Like what we touch changes the other, what touches us changes us. And this element of like indirect work, I really saw that because during the COVID lockdowns, I saw the ways in which my queer community were quite vulnerable and quite marginalized. And I lived in an area where we bumped up against and we intersected quite heavily with a lot of people who hopped on the whole Woo to Q pipeline. And I saw how these people who I deeply disliked, our well-being was so intrinsically tied up together because of our proximity. And just this like element of like, there's an element or like a mystery for being feral and taking cultural responsibility and trying to weave that in. And like that whole queer kinship requires like shape shifting and becoming quite skilled at edge work, but then also navigating that management with what has been managed before and how it was, and supporting that whilst we have all this newness entering a system, there's just so much busyness happening and being able, and it's so like there's no one size fits all way of doing
That's it. It's like trying to work out your governance and protections and safety, like in an emerging community. It's kind of like that because it's dysregulated, unregulated, and there's no law yet, and there's transgression. And you've got to figure out how to make sure that doesn't turn into a bad culture. And it's the same with your environment. It's working the same way. If you can work out one, you can work out the other. And we've talked about this before. But yeah, anyway, hey, we should get on a call too, and I can share the Toad stuff with you.
Would really love that. Yeah.
Toad. Yeah. Yeah. There's a good song. There's a song. Yeah, that's you like. Yeah.
Man, I'd love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
We had one last question, which is a very practical question as well in the question, and it's from Anne Price. Hey Tyson, where is your preferred place to buy your books?
Whatever's most convenient for you. Eh?
It's a solid answer.
Yeah. It's good. I mean, it's good to support local libraries, local bookstores. Like that's just a good thing to do. If you have to wait a couple of weeks from to get it in, that's great. But also at the same time, Amazon, all right. Getting to flick it over the same day with a drone or something. Who wants to wait? Yeah, I don't mind. Yeah, bring on the drones. Make kin with the machines. Yeah,
make kin with the machines. That's exciting and terrifying, and I don't have anything to orient myself around that piece.
Yeah.
We have a response here from Manu. Rosie Revelston Books are a social enterprise who donate 15% to refugee programs. So there you go. If you don't want to make kin with a drone, there you go.
There you go. Yeah, do it. That's it. Yeah.
Karawi.
But yeah, the story, all the knowledge isn't in books, it's in the yarns, and like yarning with different people about your dragons, your worms, your serpents, your Uraeus, your Orm, Jormungandr from like Scandi way. Like, yeah, you get into it. Share the yarns, the snake yarns, and you'll just find like, that's where your culture will come out. That's where your protocols for your emergent poly community will snake their way through. Yeah. Because you don't want to mess with the snake once you know him. You're pretty mindful of how the flows go and keeping them right. Yeah.
Tiro kaura demarai kahinga era keife Kahama ki kone. Kia ora.
Yo.
Kei te mihi nunu ki a koe, Tyson. Karawe, ia kōrero. Kei te mihi nunu ki a koe mō tō kaha, mō tō mātauranga, mō tō mana. Huge thanks, huge mihi to you, Tyson. Thank you for
Anyway.
Journeying into all of these pockets of mātauranga, of knowledge, of kinship, of where that yarn, fosters that way of being that expands us beyond what this, really punched in narrative that is sort of everywhere. So it's always a refreshing, skin prickling, place making, time making experience having a yarn with you, and always never long enough. But yeah, mihi nunu, thank you so much for coming in and with us.
Yeah, thanks you, Mub. Oh yeah, always love coming in. Yeah.
Kia ora.
Bo.
And flood the chat, everyone. Flood the Q&A with thanks. Look up Tyson's podcast if you absolutely enjoyed having that journey expand you in the ways that you didn't know you needed to. And yeah, get on all of those books. That are deadly, they're awesome. They're definitely part of the work that needs to be done in understanding the feral, understanding the role of the feral, and recognizing what our pathway to kinship is. So thank you so much. Gosh, it feels so brutal being constrained by the time constraints of this linear webinar series. Toad, would you like to say what's happening now?
Yeah, so we keep circling back to the fact that we are living and relating through the joyful, deeply dysphoric experience of Zoom, and that requires us to take breaks, take ourselves out of our thinking heads, take ourselves into the body, the guts, the heart, everything that we need to. So we're taking a half an hour little break now to water in, water out, tend to yourself, your loved ones, what you need to do, your gardens. Do what you need to do to integrate, regulate, and if you want to, show up again in half an hour to continue these conversations and these discussions about permaculture and the fact that permaculture and all these other movements are very deeply political.